Hey, welcome back to the Jiu-Jitsu Mindset. It's Pete Deeley. Uh, can report again this week that submission coffee remains not a performance-enhancing drug. So always encourage you to go to the jujitsumindset.com and check out our t-shirts, but you can subscribe to Submission Coffee there. Reports in tournament season have yielded extraordinary results, so please don't be disadvantaged out there on the mats. And our kids class at the Jiu-Jitsu Mindset Online Academy is, been well received. And if you got a kid that's around 7 to 12 years of age, it's a class designed to kind of keep them engaged when they're not in class, but keeping their interest focused on all the good stuff in the world. As I tell you every week, the divine smiles on me and we get to talk to great people, wonderful folks who enrich my life and our conversations, I hope, enrich yours. And this week is no exception. So Professor Eddie Fyvie, thank you for spending time with me.
Absolutely. Very glad to be here. Thank you.
Um, in preparing to talk with you, I mean, it's clear there's a lot of intellectual energy in your life pointed at jiu-jitsu. And so,
Mm.
um, I'm fascinated by that commitment. The physical commitment is, the gating commitment. Do you
Mm.
go through the process to learn it? The emotional commitment to me is, do you stick with it past those lulls and plateaus and things that make you go, well, maybe this isn't such a great use of time. And then to bring
Mhm.
your mind to the party as well, the way that you have, feels like a very complete relationship. I'm just, before we talk about what that relationship means to you, if you hadn't pointed all that energy in the direction of jujitsu, do you have a sense of where you would have brought all of, what is really a very successful engagement with a beautiful art? You would have been successful elsewhere, I'm sure. I'm curious what direction you might have gone.
That's a good question, and I don't know if I would have been. I grew up in a very rough neighborhood with a single father who was he was in the AA program for about 38 years, and
Wow.
so we were a unique pair, the two of us. So I grew up in a very rough neighborhood, getting beat up, bullied, the list goes on and on. And I didn't really have much direction. I had a good friend growing up, kind of not really, he was a little bit older than me. But he ended up actually becoming a very good basketball player. Went to college, went to the NBA, and he was like a source of inspiration for me
Wow.
that just showed that there's potential out there somewhere. I wasn't sure what it would be,
Hmm.
but I knew that there was some type of potential. And I was always drawn to sport more than anything. Started as a baseball, then transitioned. And once I saw jujitsu as like a weak, small, frail kids getting beat up all the time, I was searching for this something.
Hmm.
And once I saw that, I was like, that's what I need. But as far as what else I would have done, honestly, I can't really say because I didn't, I started so young as a kid.
Yeah.
I don't really see any other path I would have been on.
When you came to jiu-jitsu, given the context that you were living in there, um, did you did you show up to the mats emboldened that, oh, I'm going to be more capable, or did you show up nervous because your experience had been, one of being disadvantaged in
Mm.
these physical confrontations? Because, particularly among the kids, we notice sometimes you got to tamp down their assertiveness, and others you have to raise their
Mhm.
assertiveness. And
Yes, for sure.
having had my brush with those things in my youth, I'm curious what
Mm.
attitude you brought when you began that process.
Well, it was interesting for me because this was in, let's say, sorry, my video cut out. This was 1998.
Hmm.
So jujitsu was relatively new, and I
Yeah,
was practicing in an area of upstate New York where there's really no legit, like, I'm not going to say legit, but official instruction.
right.
So it was really a club of individuals training out videotapes and just gathering
Mm.
whatever we could. So I never actually trained with a kid.
Okay.
I never
Oh,
had a chance.
okay.
The only time I would see kids was when I'd go to tournaments.
Right.
Um, as far as what I brought in terms of like at that time, where I came from, I was at a point where growing up, my father would always tell me that you always fight even if you know you're going to lose.
Right.
And so just embracing that mentality all the time and not rarely winning fights,
Yeah.
I was at a point where it was normalized for me, fighting, that type of energy and things like that. I will say though, right before I found jiu-jitsu, I had randomly started Pee Wee wrestling. And I only started
Mm.
Pee Wee wrestling because I walked into this place that had a sign that said wrestling, and they had a giant wrestling ring,
Wow.
professional wrestling ring. So
Oh,
I,
wow.
I was going in there to be in the wrestling ring. I wanted to be in the WWF at the time.
Yeah.
And but they go, no, your wrestling's over on that side of the mat. So they moved me over and I started wrestling. Like, man, this is really tough. This is crazy. And I did that for about 2 weeks. And I remember there's two kids in my neighborhood that would always beat me up. They're brothers. And I remember one of them coming up to me that day, and I see him coming down the street, and I go, here we go. I knew something was going to happen, but I didn't really know what I was going to do. But I remember looking at him going, you know what? I'm just going to double leg him. I'm going to double leg him. And I didn't think that was fighting, though, at
Right,
that
right.
time.
Yeah.
So I'm 10 years old. So I took him down, I double legged him, and I put him in a cradle and locked him up. And I remember instantly how helpless he felt.
Yeah.
And I thought I was holding him. And he's like begging me to let him go. It's the first time I ever overpowered him.
Hmm.
And after that, I remember walking away and thinking, I have a superpower,
Yeah.
literally. I was looking around my neighborhood to figure out who wrestles. So I
Hmm.
was like, does anybody, because I wanted to keep this and I didn't tell anybody I don't want to do it. And literally maybe a week after that moment, I stumbled upon UFC one
Oh,
and
wow.
saw Hoist Gracie.
Wow.
So my connection to it, when I saw Hoist come out and I thought he was a karate guy in a uniform
Right.
and he shot a double leg takedown, I was like,
Here
that's wrestling.
we go.
So I was connected to it because instantly I knew that it worked.
Hmm.
So like even as a young kid doing it, I just had this experience where I used wrestling. And I thought to myself, yeah, if you don't wrestle, you can't really be competitive. You can't fight
Yeah.
back. If any new kid comes to a wrestling mat, they get thrown around. So when I saw the double leg, I was instantly drawn to it. Then I saw him in the second fight of the night, Ken Shamrock, fight off of his back. And that was
Mm.
where it was like, I'm
Yeah.
locked in. I don't
Yeah.
care what this is. I don't care what it takes. That's who I need to become. I need to be that guy in the ring right there. So
Right.
when I finally found a place to train, I was insanely enthusiastic. I didn't care if I was getting armbar, triangle, thrown around, tossed around. I knew that I intuitively, but not really intuitively because I had this experience. I knew that I found a place that was like, this is what I've been looking for
Yeah.
right here. I tried karate, tried boxing, everything, but the grappling is what really did it for me.
Yeah. Do were were you self-aware as this young kid about what was going on? Did you have an understanding of like why you were doing what you're doing, or were you in such sort of fight or flight mode that everything was sort of an instinct? Because
Mm-hmm.
if your father was in Al-Anon or AA or whatever would be the right term during that time, my guess is he's probably white knuckling a certain portion of his experience. If,
Absolutely.
I mean, trying to just keep himself to be, must be trying to be the best dad he could be for you and
Mhm.
with his own struggles. And then you're in an environment where every day you seem to be encountering something
Mm.
that could be disruptive. So was your nervous system and your brain have enough distance to understand what was going on, or were you just reacting day in and day out to the stimuli in front of you?
Honestly, I reached a point where I think I had so much thrown at me so early, and I
Yeah.
was forced to mature
Yeah.
quickly. I tell people stories about my childhood, and like I have an 8-year-old son. I can't imagine him hearing about or seeing the things that I saw.
Yeah.
So it definitely matured me very quickly.
Hmm.
And then honestly, you get to a point where uh, you, I often talk about how this idea of being reasonable is directly relative to your ability to give or receive force. So
Interesting.
for example, someone who's practiced jujitsu for a long time, we have a very close relationship to that concept of force because we've been smashed and we've smashed,
Right.
right? So my ability to be reasonable is because that juxtaposition, that contrast is directly relative. So if you watch like a police officer that's able to reason with somebody, it's usually a police officer that's well trained
Hmm.
because he understands the reality of what could potentially become in that situation. And you'll also see that like as a child getting beat up or being in rough situations, there was a lot of situations where I was almost numb to,
Yeah.
in some sense, where someone big kid wanted to beat me up. It was like, go ahead.
Right. Right.
I've been beat up before. Yeah,
Yeah.
so there's
Yeah.
nothing you're going to do to me that I haven't experienced or haven't been surprised by. So I would say, as far as like that fight or flight instinct, it was more of a indifference or a
Okay.
numbness, just
Okay.
to a normalization of things. So I think it made it a little bit easier for me to go into a grappling environment
Yeah.
and
Yeah, you had a
and
sense
be
of being
successful.
uncomfortable. I mean, I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
most when you think about, and just to, I don't mean to overly dwell on it. I'm
Mhm.
interested in
Sure.
this. My children are older now. I just became a grandfather, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Congrats.
my grandpa name is Spartacus. I like to tell everybody. So that baby's going
That's
to have
great.
a lot of syllables to learn. But when I think about the differences of my coming up as a child and then my children's, all kids have their own struggles. They're all, everybody has their own stuff, but it's very different than the things that I have. And when I think about some of my experiences that could share some things in common with yours, I wondered what that gave me as a person that could only be given to me in the context of being overwhelmed, overpowered, having to struggle in situations where I was going to lose, but I had to do my best to
Mm,
protect myself and all that. Do you
sure.
do you see those as, when you look at your own lessons and then being a father, ways to convey the same um, positive things that came out of it, the skills of resilience, courage, things that were required of you before you had the choice to acquire them, because you
Mhm.
were being, can you give them to a kid without those negative situations? It's always been on my mind as a parent.
Absolutely. And you could also do it in like a gradient exposure.
Okay,
So that's basically what we're doing here at Jiu-Jitsu
nice.
is, you bring somebody into a safe environment and you're exposing them to elements of stress, problem
Yeah.
solving, discomfort, and things, but you're doing it on a gradient so that it's not to overwhelm. And I think the fact that I was pushed into many situations against my will
Right.
and against my own, let's say, self-determinism, it created a sense of overwhelm where there would be other aspects of my personality or many other areas of my life growing up where I would have reactions to things or not understand things or struggle with things that if I had not been exposed to whatever
Hmm.
wouldn't have been an issue. So I think having, now having a son, having gone through that and experienced that, it's like I see the value in stress,
Right.
and what that could potentially create in an individual. But the fact that I can control it and I can to a certain extent, and I can offer it to them in ways that are more productive
Yeah.
and more positive. I think that's the better way. That's the ideal way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, Greg, because it requires the teacher, the mentor to have a degree of wisdom, which is different than knowledge, in my opinion. Like you
Mhm.
can understand how to convey something, some convey an idea, convey a technique, convey, pick whatever. But the wisdom is like the why. Like
Mhm.
why are we doing this? And not just the why of this is about leverage, not force, but it's also when I think about what's going on the mats for 99.9% of the people, it's about stress inoculation,
Mhm.
community, feeling safer, feeling, lots of things that have nothing to do with making sure you're heavy on somebody during side control. So
Absolutely.
when you think about your acquisition of jiu-jitsu as a skill, I mean, you were learning other things too. It sounds like you're learning wrestling. Did jiu-jitsu require things of your mind and body that were different than other things, or was it all kind of on a continuum, particularly because you were young? Maybe it all got lumped together. And as an instructor, professor, like, do you think that jiu-jitsu is a different thing to acquire than other skills, other
Mm.
arts?
Yeah, I would say in terms of like, let's say, other skills, activities, sports, it's definitely different because of the fact that we're immediately engaging with a person
Yeah,
in an instinctively uncomfortable situation of closeness.
right.
If I
Yeah,
were to walk up to somebody on the street and just get close to them, they would instantly want to shy
yeah,
kind of away from me. Like, what are you doing? Why are you close to me? Get away from me. So So there's a lot of barriers to starting jujitsu and overcoming that. As far as like learning a skill, I would say the only difference is the amount of stress that jujitsu can actually create in itself creates a barrier to learning. So, for example, if a beginner is thrown into a sink or swim situation, it's going to be very difficult for them to learn. And so, I wouldn't say there's a massive differentiation. I know there's a big uh, debate in jujitsu over ecological and traditional and
Sure.
things like that.
Yeah.
And I think that gets lost a lot of times. But I, I think that in terms of acquiring a skill, I think that's a deeply rooted um, thing that kind of transcends across all types of activities. In terms of difficulty, there's no doubt jujitsu is a struggle. Otherwise, everybody would be doing it, and nobody would be quitting, and
Right.
things
Yeah.
like that. It's something that there are certain times the confusion is so great, it's hard for people to persevere, and there's a lot of discomfort. So there's definitely a higher difficulty level. Where that lies, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I
No,
think it's all relative. Yeah.
yeah, it makes sense to me what you're saying. I mean, I think the it's interesting when you talk about if you got to somebody close on the street, how, instinctively they'd move away. But and then on the mats, we tell people to do exactly that, right? Like it's going to be okay. Do this thing that would is
Yeah.
unnatural.
And it's also what I realized recently, it's one of the few activities where like a lot of times in the beginner stages of jujitsu, the instructor is teaching as if you're going to be going against somebody unskilled, like in a
Right,
self-defense situation, how to punch, block, and things like that. And then all of a sudden you reach a point where you go, okay, forget all that. We're going to roll against each other and it's skill versus skill.
right.
And it's like the only activity, I can't think of another activity where they go in and say, we're going to learn basketball against people that don't know how to play basketball.
Right,
And then we're going to try to learn it against people that do.
right, right.
So there's elements of that that are a little strange to me that, are that make it a little bit trickier to learn in some sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I remember listening to Huron and like a few people talk about their childhood with jiu-jitsu and people asking them questions about, well, what was it like? And as a very, very young person, they're like
Right.
it was just about having fun. It was just about, exploring the movements. And as somebody who started at 50, creating that atmosphere of like relaxation, like being relaxed, understanding that the skill is going to take a long time, like it's okay if it doesn't feel natural, is a difficult environment, I think, to create. When I listen to you talk about fighting, fighting on the streets and particularly before you're very well trained, and then competition, which is a different experience, in my mind, very different experience. But they do have some relationship to each other too. Like it's competition, regardless of, and I'm not talking about the highest levels of competition, but people who go and learn jujitsu then have a chance to, to compete in a local tournament, that type of competition. So I'm curious what your perspective is with your students and your community on the role of competition in somebody's development in their journey as a jujitsu athlete.
Yeah, I've changed a lot over the years in terms of my viewpoint on that. And I competed for many years, and I like that was my whole life, and I certainly wouldn't. I don't regret any of that time. I'd say nowadays, though, I really make sure that it's a total personal decision. I
Hmm.
don't put any emphasis. Oh, trying to stop my notification. Okay. I don't put any emphasis on competition or pushing people or things like that. I have people come up to me. I'll put it out there. People will hear about it. They'll ask me if they should do it. I have no idea who that is. I'll talk to them about why um, they want to do it, if they want to do it. And I see the value in it. And I also see that there's a negative side to it as well.
Yeah,
And most people don't talk about the negative side of exposing somebody to a certain level of stress before they're really ready to handle it.
yeah.
It's no different than being in class and throwing them into a rough situation before they can handle it. So I've seen a lot of people do competitions and have an experience that was so overwhelming to them they never came
Mm.
back from,
Oh,
especially
wow.
with kids.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and not even a bad experience, not an injury, nothing, but going there and being under the spotlight, just being in a situation where they just at that time weren't ready for it.
Right.
And maybe they were pushed into it because their training partners were doing it or their coach pushed them. But for me, if someone wants to compete, I mean, we're competing every time we roll on a scalable level, you know.
Right.
So if somebody wants to go out there and do it, I fully support them, and I think it's great if they're doing it for the right reasons. But it's not something I push people towards at all. It's got to be a personal thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that is many people are landing exactly where you're at as instructors. There's what is it that you're looking for, um, student or whoever in the community? And I think with the kids that figuring out, is it the kid's choice or is it the environment's choice, is a tricky bit. But if I ask your lizard brain, the just to react to, hey, what's your most memorable role or fight or whatever story you'd want to tell? Is there one that pops up as like, oh yeah, I remember this one the most? Do you have one of those? I'm sure you have
I
several,
do.
but like,
Yeah, for sure. I definitely would say my first MMA fight, because it was like the culmination of 8 years of, 10 years. When I started at 10 years old, I was basically like, hey, I'm here to be Hoist Gracie. How do I get into that? Where do I sign up? How do I do that?
right.
So the, I just tell you, hey, Scott, could you use that mat today? Sure. Okay, cool. Um, so my first fight was against Jim Miller, actually, UFC fighter. It was his first fight and it was also my first fight. And, basically 8 years of building to this point of expectations, people expecting me to fight, me expecting to fight, training for it, thinking about it day in and day out, like knowing that I'm going to get to that point. Everything I was doing was to get to that spot. And I remember it was in Atlantic City, Boardwalk Hall. I remember walking out, it was reality fighting. And I remember walking down to the ring, getting into the ring and turning around, seeing myself on the screen. And I went, whoa, this is real. This is actually, and then I remember turning and I looked at Jim Miller across the ring. It was a ring. And I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, he really wants to beat me up. Like, we're not sparring. I don't know him and he doesn't know me. And
Right.
this isn't a random encounter on the street where you have no time to think and you just do.
Right.
I remember looking across from him and going, this is dangerous. This is real. And then the fight starts.
Yeah.
And so that was a really surreal experience and all the expectation and build up to it.
Yeah.
I remember getting onto the ground early in the fight and being near the ropes and people in the crowd yelling that they want me to die. And,
Oh
it's
my
like,
goodness.
it was crazy. It was, and going back to the corner in the first round, I was like, what the hell am I doing here?
Yeah.
Um, but that was definitely something that I could still picture myself in my head in the ring, looking at the screen and going, I can't believe I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's real.
yeah, and there are some things that may have analogies, but other things that are kind of like it's just the experience is the experience. And yeah, it may be like something else, but it's really not that thing. When I mean, my family, I have a blended family of five children. I think, yeah, childbirth may have an analogy, but not really. Like, I mean, to give birth to another human being is its own experience. I'm not quite sure anything else is exactly like it. So what you're describing to me in some ways, like if you haven't had that experience, it's only the people that really have been through that could talk to each other in a way to really understand what it would be like, in my opinion. And much,
Absolutely.
when I have an interest in the notion of violence, I think about street fights among children, street fights among teenagers, street fights among adults, MMA, martial arts training, the law enforcement community, being a soldier on the field of battle, wherever. To me, these are all very like different experiences, and they have some things in common with each other, but then each, I think, tranche of violence in my mind is not. And I think the MMA experience, I don't know where it falls between being a soldier on the battlefield and a law enforcement. I'm not quite sure where I locate it in my head, but it feels unique to me because, like what you just said, is what I imagine it would feel like. Hey, I'm encountering somebody who's ready for this, is the intent is to be violent, and it's going to happen here in a second. Somebody's going to ring
Yeah,
that bell, and then it's going to be on. And that to me,
yeah,
having played like sports like soccer where I felt that, I don't think it's the same as looking across and experiencing what you just described.
right. It's very different. Very different, especially because you're going into an activity. All of the things you name, law enforcement, military,
Hmm.
kids, adults, MMA, they're all very, very unique in their own sense. And they all offer a much different context. I think two kids fighting, those are actually the most natural causative fights that there could possibly be
Yes.
because they're fighting over something there's a direct reason as to why
Yeah.
those two kids are fighting over
Right.
there. He took something, he hit me, he did this, right? Oftentimes where you get with adults on a street fight, it's a battle of egos. And he said something, he looked at me funny, I look
Yeah.
bad, my friends think I'm stupid. Law enforcement, military, there's no choice. You've signed up to do a job, and you have to accomplish a task. MMA is the strangest by far out of all of them because you literally have to create this fake. In some senses, there's people I fought that I didn't like, but
Right.
you have to create this animosity in some sense to want to go across and punch this person in the face. And it's a very psychologically, in some sense, damaging thing that I look back on some sense and wish I didn't do some things. But um, it's strange because you have to create this personality. You have to create this idea. You have to look at like looking across the cage at this or the ring and going, okay, now why do I want to beat this guy up right now? Like
Right.
out, and they could say it's a sport and it's this and that, but really it's like it's a it's a strange violent activity where you're fighting somebody willfully,
Hmm.
but without cause.
Right. 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 Yeah. Yeah. The cause
Yeah.
is to have a chance for the next fight, and
Yeah.
the economic realities of being a professional fighter. Yeah.
Right.
As a father, um, I've always been interested in that tension between you have to convey to your kids enough. My opinion is you have to convey to your children enough of a warrior's mentality to prepare them to be uncomfortable in circumstances. But, you know, how that then can be counterproductive if the warrior message is then interpreted as, you know, for me the violent counterpart to the warrior is the mercenary, where you're just fighting to for fighting's sake to achieve some superficial goal. Whereas the warrior, it's about the principle,
Mm.
like you're enduring these discomforts for the principle of something greater than just some immediate gain. Um, yeah, well, I mean, you've had such a wide variety of experiences. And clearly you have uh, an extraordinary amount of self-reflection and analysis of what you've been involved in. Can
Mhm.
you tell me a little bit about like I know you're doing a lot of writing and sort of turning those insights into things that you can share with other people. Can you talk about that for a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I've always kind of had an interest. Like I've always over the years, just on a general interest level, have been naturally inquisitive as to why things are the way that they are. And recently, I left ownership of my academy that I had for a long time, and now I'm just entirely focused on teaching full time. So we have a new owner, and we opened up a new business. It's great. Just started this week actually. So
Nice.
I'm just teaching full time. So um, about 3 years ago, I'll just tell you a quick story where the writing kind of came from. I'd always written blogs, articles, and things over the years, randomly when I would have time. And about 3 years ago, I had a good friend of mine who's a business mentor of mine call me up, and he's in his 50s, and he says, "I'd like to get into jujitsu." And I was like, "Oh, that's cool. That's great. He lives in Florida." And I go, "That's really cool." And he goes, "Yeah, how long would it take me to get a black belt?" And I was like, "Oh, geez, I don't know, it's 10 years, 7, 10 years." And he's like, "Damn, that's a long time." I'm like, "Well, yeah, yeah, it's difficult." And he goes, "Well, what's the quickest someone's got it?" And I go, "Well, I don't know, confirmed maybe 4 years. BJ Penn, there's a few people." And he goes, "Great, I like to do what they did. So what do I have to do? How do I do their program?" And he's asking these questions. I'm getting actually frustrated. I'm getting angry on the phone. And I go, "I don't know what they did. They trained a lot. They had money, this and that. They had, resources, whatever." he goes, cool. Where did they go? What did they do for the training? Like, if I want to do that, what would I have to do? And I had no answers for him, like no legitimate answers outside of just these little placeholder answers that I've had over the years. Like, it takes time, it's difficult,
Right.
list goes on. So I hung up the phone with him and I started just like really going crazy, thinking about all of these things I didn't have answers to. And I always prided myself in having like intellectual humility, but also wanting to have some level of certainty for the skills that I possess, wanting to have answers to questions about what I do, essentially.
Right.
So I was really frustrated by that. And that led me on this, like, I decided, I go, you know what, for the next 3 years, and there was a few other things in teaching, I was like, I'm going to teach as many classes a week as possible. I've been teaching for 19 years, but I was teaching for the past 3 years, probably 40 to 50 classes a week
Wow.
between private lessons and group classes, law enforcement, adult classes, the list goes on. Really as a little side quest to figure out why people quit jujitsu, why they plateau,
Yeah.
why they lose motivation, why they're confused, so on and so forth. So the book that I just wrote, Understanding Jiu-Jitsu, is really like kind of a self-reflection on these 3 years
Hmm.
and having this time in between my gym that I own and now I'm moving into our new business, which we just opened. I just decided to make use of this time to finish up all of these writings. I've had countless Google Docs right now where I'd
Yeah.
be up
Yeah.
midnight, get an idea and start writing about it, never finish it, have to teach 10 classes the next day and never get back to it. So
Right.
when I had this lapse of time for a month, I was like, I'm going to finish my book and start really trying to write about topics that resonate with people
Hmm.
on a level where trying to look at questions that people have in jujitsu that they don't get answers to, trying to look at emotions that people experience. For example, getting a belt and not feeling deserving of it,
Right.
or
Right. Yeah.
being 50 years old starting jujitsu and wondering what the hell am I doing here at a certain point. So,
Sure.
and that's I experienced that from everybody. I've had thousands of students, wondering when I see somebody in the grocery store who I haven't seen in 6 months, and I see them, I go, "Hey, where you been?" They go, I got to get back. I go, "Well, what's going on?" "I don't know." And I'm like, "Did you like it?" They go, "Yeah, I love it." I go, "Well, what are you doing?"
Right. Right.
I having no answers. And looking at all these different assumptions, stripping them away, and just trying to lay my thoughts out. And I think long form writing, in terms of a book or these longer articles on Substack, allow me to clarify my thoughts completely, and also allow me to work through my thoughts. I know writing's like been a therapeutic exercise for me to like
Sure.
basically lay out things that are unspoken that I can't quite put into words yet. For some reason, when I write, it offers me that. So that's where I've started putting a lot of energy, and I think I'm going to continue that. It's something that's been great for me, and people are enjoying it. It seems, and I think there's a lot of topics that haven't been touched upon. This is jujitsu still really in its infancy stages,
Yeah.
and
No,
it's yeah. So that's where we're at now.
clearly you have a love of language. I mean, did that come from someplace specific, or was it just always a part of you? I mean, to write requires a certain, I think, intellectual curiosity about how words on a page connect to an idea in your head, and it's too hard to not have a love for it. So I'm just curious if that as a my mother is actually one of our great poets in the United States, and so
Oh wow,
language, yeah, she's
that's amazing.
one of our poet laureates, and someone,
Wow,
yeah, I'm really proud of
that's
her.
cool.
Yeah, so the role of language in my house was always uh, obvious in a certain sense because like how you said it and what you said was always important. Like there wasn't a lot of slack for you just say whatever you want because you're irritated or mad. Like, forced me to think about why I said what I said and how I said it. I'm curious if you can think of a time when that either flipped, like, oh, words are important, or if it's just from the beginning, it's part of who you are.
Yeah, I mean it's a lot that I've learned over the years, and especially struggling throughout my life in various ways to communicate and wanting to be a better communicator, and then learning about communication and really realizing that the ability to communication is really like the universal solvent
Yeah,
of
yeah.
everything
Yeah,
that exists.
nicely put. Yeah.
And realizing that there were certain moments in training or teaching or communication where I would say something that the person didn't understand, and immediately I would notice the weight that lack of understanding carried.
Yeah, yeah.
And most people don't realize, like, as you mentioned, like this idea of language and words and terminology and nomenclature and stuff, how that plays a role in how we see, view, and understand the world. So understanding, this idea of words, communication, language, how they create symbols, how they create patterns, how they connect things, how I can get my point across. It's something over the years through various ways and means that I've just always picked up on. And once I understood how critical it is for someone to understand me,
Yeah.
I started paying a lot more attention to not just what I said, but actually like the words I was using.
Yeah, yeah.
And when I'm teaching a class and I say, this is a Kimura, and I don't elaborate further on that.
Hmm.
And I have everybody looking, all the beginners going, what do you say? What's that, Chimera? They're
Yeah,
just
yeah.
totally confused and puzzled. So yeah, I've just I've I was a terrible student in school. I just didn't like school. I graduated, I think, with I tell people I graduated with low honors, but um, I graduated high school like a 65 average, and I
Hmm.
just hated being there. I hated school, but I was constantly reading books. I was constantly interested in Russian novels and Russian
Wow.
literature growing up. And I don't know why I had an English teacher when I was young. I remember the book, they had a Crime and Punishment book
Sure.
sitting, and I was just fast. I would look at the title every single day. I was in fifth grade, and I would look at the title every day, Crime and Punishment. And there was something about the way the word sat that I just was interested in. So I started getting into it and uh, reading and reading these books and being able to see things come to life just with words.
Yeah.
It's just been an interest of mine.
Yeah, I think that's wonderfw. I don't for me, language is an unavoidable discipline. At some point in your life, you have to accept that you have to w watch what you're saying as a way to understand how you're thinking. Like if you don't understand yourself, I don't think you can understand yourself unless you're a student of language because we're so reflexive. Otherwise, things just come out of our mouths. And, once you slow down, that's why I think when I listen to you talk about writing, it's a space in which there's not a time pressure. You're not responding to another person, so you can take your time, pick your words. It's clear that you want to be connected to other people. I mean, the act of writing envisions an audience. Someone's going to read this. And so, as a professor and instructor of these different things you taught over the years, much in the same way I asked about your fight, do you have a story of, hey, here's somebody that was helped by jiu-jitsu or what I was teaching in the most dramatic way that you came across? You have a story like that you could share
I
with us?
do. Yeah. And it's similar actually to when I mentioned the story about my friend calling me and asking me how long it's going to take him to get a black
Yeah.
belt. I had just started these three law enforcement programs where I had three contracts with local law enforcement agencies, and they were doing jujitsu twice a week for those 3 years. And I remember one of the police officers coming in and telling me in the morning, we had a 6 a.m. class. He's like, last night, this is at the end of his shift. So about 4 hours before this, he goes, oh, I used that takedown from last week. And I was like, really? Oh, that's cool. That's great. And I remember in that class, I was doing a show him a double leg. And I just had this flash for a second where I, I almost felt this immense sense of pressure that I never felt. And I go, wow, in 19 years, I've been teaching self defense basically, trained MMA fighters. I fought MMA and, you name it. But in 19 years, I've been teaching self defense, but nobody's defending themselves.
Right.
Nobody's getting in fights.
Yeah.
And I realized that the people I was teaching in that class might have to use it today,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
in an hour from now.
Right.
So I immediately was like, okay, I need to figure this out even better because I'm like, whatever I'm showing, my intention and goal at that point was whatever I show that day, I want to make sure that when I leave that class, that I feel like they can use it under resistance.
Yes. Yes.
Because I put this extra pressure on myself to like re-examine things and figure out like this is kind of crazy. So in that sense, there's a group of stories there where they were using these techniques immediately, which is commonplace for people that teach jujitsu to law enforcement.
Right.
But I never had a feeling like that where I was like, wow, what I'm teaching is actually,
This isn't theoretical. This is,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
as strange as that sounds.
No, I mean that's and yeah, at another time I'd love to hear, all those stories, but I mean that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think about that too, if people have come in and we've had people that are part of the reserve system, Army Reserve or whatnot, but they sometimes get deployed and I think about the difference between what it would feel like, if the most intense circumstance I might have is I'm going to a continent tournament in 8 days,
Yeah,
and that is not the
sure.
same as a bad guy on the street if I was a police officer. Well, there may be people who want to buy your book and get to read your Substack. Can you just tell us a little bit about how to find your book and your Substack?
Yeah, so it's just under my name, eddiefyvie.com, EDDIEFYVIE.com. My Substack's under the same name.
Okay.
So I've been writing for the next year. I'm writing an article a day.
Wow.
Uh, and I've got, like I said, I've had countless unfinished articles, and I'm basically trying to put everything under a microscope. Every, uh, cliche, assumption, topic, idea, concept, um, jujitsu principles,
Hmm.
feelings, emotions, like everything I'm catching and capturing on a day-to-day basis from this petri dish that I'm working in here.
Nice.
Um, I'm trying to, talk about and go into and see if there's actually answers
Yeah.
that, have been unanswered. So we'll see.
Yeah, my guess is that every answer leads to the next 10 questions, given your inquisitiveness and all
For
of our,
sure. Yeah,
the seeking nature of it. Well, I'm so grateful that you took time. And if you're writing an article a day, this was a precious hour for you to give up because all the teaching you're doing and then all the writing you're doing, time is clearly
awesome.
tight. But it sounds like, you're going to have a lot of things that we should talk about in the future. So I hope you'll consider coming back and maybe we can do another one of these.
Absolutely. I'd love that. Thank you very much for having me.
It was my pleasure.